You know, I think Prop 20 is the physical manifestation of Californians' love for the coast. The coast is everybody's backyard, right? And all of these people from all over California came together in 1972 in this amazing campaign to protect their backyard.
And there was so much rampant development, and the idea of having all those big buildings lining up along the coast like we're in Hawaii and other places in the world, I think really freaked people out.
You know, there was this sort of emerging environmental consciousness and political power or force that's emerging. And it all came together, everybody came together for the entire coastline.
The real estate interests that own the California coast pretty much owned Sacramento and ensured that no legislation that would thwart their economic desires would pass.
This was like grassroots versus money, grassroots versus the real estate industry, grassroots versus developers.
It was a sort of a David and Goliath story, really.
Prop 20 was the ultimate victory of the underdogs.
They had the money and we had the energy, you know. They had the corporations and we had the people. And we really felt we were doing God's work. I mean, we were out there saving the California coast.
I think maybe on Prop 20, I think it reawakened ideas that locals and people could have some power.
What they managed to do, doing this like from living rooms and over kitchen tables and standing outside supermarkets, I mean, it was an extraordinary coming together of the public on a statewide basis, all with the same goal.
I think Prop 20 was kind of the turning point of being able to make us realize that it's not just the land that's important, it's the sea and this incredibly valuable coastline that we call California.
The power of the people to rally together and achieve great things. I still think of it as the ultimate political success story in California, if not in the nation, Proposition 20.
It changed the face of California forever.
So back in the late 60s and early 70s, the face of California was changing extremely rapidly and not for the better.
Well, a key moment was the 1969 Santa Barbara oil spill. I mean, that ignited the environmental movement in California, and maybe you could say even nationally and partly worldwide.
I was in the end of my high school years in 1969 when the oil spill hit, and the impact that happened so quickly, and that it was this helpless feeling that all this oil is spilling on the beach and the birds and all the damage that occurred. I think that was a wide-eyed, open awakening to see that the coast was fragile.
I remember PG&E at the time, at a hearing in Sacramento, which I attended, they wanted to build a nuclear power plant every 20 miles along the California coast. I mean, they presented that plan in front of Charlie Warren, who was the head of the Assembly Natural Resources Committee. There was a proposed LNG plant in Santa Barbara County. At Point Conception, I think it's called, like one of the most dangerous parts of the coast in terms of currents and everything. And they were going to put an LNG terminal there.
Development was largely the province of local governments, cities and counties. And all you need to get a project approved at the local level is basically 3 votes on a Tuesday. And so, by and large, California was getting rapidly developed and going through an incredible transformation at the ad hoc discretion of several dozen cities and counties that were just primarily concerned with increasing their tax base as opposed to protecting their natural resources.
The main thing that we had going here in Northern California was a fear of development on the coast. And we had huge plans for development along the coast back in the 60s, where they were talking about building a freeway, east-west freeways, and a major freeway from San Francisco to Santa Cruz. And it was the developers that were encouraging Caltrans to build the freeway. San Mateo County has 50 miles, a beautiful, pristine coast. And that was all going to be slated for development and everything like that.
In Southern California, of course, Malibu is the most glaring example of that, where homes were literally built on the sand. And then people eventually resorted to using bulldozers to push sand up against them, put rock revetments, riprap to protect their homes.
Coastal cities were just starting in development, that phase. Orange County accepted development. Development was king. The Irvine Company that controlled a lot of our coastal resources controlled things, and no one put a stop to it. Huntington Harbor, which is used to be a part of the whole wetland system in California, that was built without a murmur.
Freeway expansions. Proponents of freeway expansions along the coast actually were making the argument that freeways were good for the coast because they helped anchor the sand dunes and helped prevent the sand from blowing all around. And that filling bays and estuaries was good because it drove out invasive cordgrass. I mean, these were the kind of arguments that were made by the pro-development forces.
Another group of women over in Berkeley back in the 60s had started a group called Save the Bay. And the developers were filling the San Francisco Bay, the marshlands around the edge of the bay, to put houses up and more development. Pete McCloskey was involved in stopping the Rockefeller family from leveling off the top of San Bruno Mountain. They were going to level off the top of the mountain and then build condos up on top of the mountain on the mesa. And they were going to take the dirt from all that they had leveled off on conveyor belts down over the freeway to fill the bay so they could build more houses in the bay. That's the kind of thinking that was going on.
Probably everyone in most parts of the state could be angry or upset, or certainly at the minimum question, why did they approve this? And if you go back and look how it was approved, it was through local land use and the pressures by developers, and every community kind of had something that really didn't look right, either blocked public access, blocked public views, was exclusively for rich people, and a number of things, or destroyed habitat, filled a wetland.
It was very clear that if the state or somebody or some entities didn't step in, that we would see the kind of development that we know is in many other states, with high-rise developments, a lot of lock-gate communities, golf courses, offshore oil drilling, all this kind of rampant development that was really going to hurt the environment, only helping the developers and the people that own the property. And the general public, the people of California, were not going to gain from this. They were going to be locked out of their coast.
People on the coast were really galvanized. They were really concerned and wanted to do something to protect the coast. And so they did what most movements do, is they reached out to elected officials and they tried to get a coastal protection law passed.
I went to work for then Assemblyman Leo Ryan. Ryan was a legislator for northern San Mateo County in the state assembly. And when I worked for him as his administrative assistant, we were getting harassed by, it was basically a group of women here in the county, one of whom was Janet Adams, a woman named Claire Dedrick, who became Secretary of Resources under Jerry Brown the first time he was governor. Local activists, and so they were concerned about the coast, and so Ryan wanted to show that he was concerned about the coast too, and so he wrote a bill. So this was a couple of years before Prop 20, George Milius and Leo Ryan had a bill, and Cerroti had a bill.
John Dunlap was a state legislator, state assemblyman. He was elected at the same time I was, and we were very good friends because we had been active in the Democratic Party before. He was represented the Napa, Sonoma area, and a development along the Sonoma coast, Sea Ranch. Beautiful development proposed, but it was going to eliminate the public's right to go into that area, to go to the beaches. And John Dunlap and I had been working together on legislation. And so John Dunlap was talking to me about it, and I said, well, we ought to do something about it. The first bill we put in was my bill having to do with that 10 miles. And it didn't get anywhere. So the next year we tried again. And one of the important people in this whole process was Ellen Stern Harris. And Ellen was a good friend of mine. And so I told her about this, and she said, well, you know what you ought to do? You ought to do something for the entire coast. And I had never thought about that. So we turned our attention to trying to develop a proposal that would protect the coastal area to the public all up and down the coast.
And they were successful in getting a bill introduced for 3 years running. But every year, the special interests opposed to that bill were successful in killing it. The oil industry, the real estate industry, power companies, railroads.
The coast of California is an extraordinarily valuable piece of real estate, and therefore there was very powerful forces in Sacramento that worked very hard to make sure that they could keep control for the California coast to themselves and make the most amount of money, because it was probably one of the most valuable pieces of real estate on planet Earth.
So I'd say the big fight those days was over local control, because people philosophically said, no, we do not want a state agency, bureaucracy controlling what cities and counties rightfully control, and it's called home rule, and they want that, and that is sacred. But that was the fight in the legislature. But I think underground that, or behind that, of course, is development interests.
The Irvine Company had great plans. You know, they've developed half of Orange County. It's a major player. And these are wealthy, developers are wealthy, and they influence politicians to make decisions in Sacramento.
Peter Douglas has told some pretty colorful stories about the lengths that those entities went to kill the bill. And in one instance, a key vote in a Senate committee didn't show up to a hearing, and people were frantically calling around and trying to find him. And it turned out that he was home at his ranch accepting the delivery of a racehorse that was a gift from one of the entities that was opposed to the bill. So that bill died in that committee, and that's just an example of the kind of pressure and political shenanigans that went on to try and prevent the legislature from passing a coastal protection bill.
And when we had the hearing in the state Senate in the third year, we had one Democratic member of the Senate was not there. So the committee was originally 5 people. There were only 4 people there, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. The Democrats voted for it. The Republicans did not vote for it. And so the bill failed. So when that occurred, we decided we had to go to the initiative.
All I knew about the early legislative effort, I mean, that's Alan Cerroti's baby, and Peter Douglas, who was his administrative assistant, who really deserves most of the credit maybe for the California Coastal Commission. I mean, God bless Alan. And it was his vision, but Peter made it happen. But I was working with Peter Baer, who had then been elected state senator, and our first bill was to save the wild rivers in Northern California. So our effort, we were doing the Wild Rivers bill while Peter and Alan were doing the coastal legislation with John Dunlap's help in the Senate. He was the principal, as I recall, the principal Senate author. So we supported each other, but I was not involved in the drafting or anything. But you know, they made, as I recall, 3 efforts to get it past the legislature, and then realized the only way to get it done was to let the people decide.
Prop 20 was historic in a lot of different ways. It was the last ballot initiative that qualified for the ballot entirely through volunteer signature gathering. A network of volunteers fanned out across the landscape in a very short period of time and gathered over 400,000 signatures to get the measure on the ballot.
It was always part of the planning that, okay, we're going to give the legislature a chance, but if they don't, we're not going to give up, we're not going to stop there, we're not going to let the developers buy enough legislators to keep killing this bill. We will go to the people. We were convinced, and again, this is mainly Peter and Alan and John Dunlap, we're convinced that the people of California will support this given an opportunity. So it's always the backup plan. And when that third time when it failed, we said, okay, let's go.
I am very critical of the initiative process because I think today a lot of bills go through the initiative process and the people never know what it is and they vote for it because there's some slogan or something. And I differentiate our efforts because we went 3 times through the legislature. And when you go through the assembly committees and the Senate committee, they tend to require you to think again about a lot of provisions. So I thought, well, gee, we went through it 3 times, and by this time the people know about the legislation and so forth. So I thought, well, we're okay going to the initiative.
There were a lot of essential players in the success of Prop 20, but there were 2 people without whom I would argue the campaign would not have been a success. And those 2 people are Peter Douglas and Janet Adams.
Peter Douglas was a very close friend of mine. He was introduced to me as a UCLA law school graduate by Rowan Klein, who was on my staff at that time. I can remember that he said, well, I'd like you to meet Peter Douglas. And we had lunch together, and I liked him, and I suggested he join our staff.
I had determined never to go into politics or work in politics, but after a couple hours with Alan, I really liked the guy. And I thought this would be a wonderful person to work with. He's a humanist, smart, not arrogant, not pretentious, and not really political.
And when Alan Cerroti hired him and he moved to Sacramento, the first bill that he dropped on Peter's desk was the coastal bill. And he said, your job this year is to get this bill through. And so Peter learned on the job about coastal protection and all of the political forces swirling around coastal development proposals.
So I think he came out of that background of just love for the coast and understanding how laws work and how state agencies are based on them and the constitutionality of them. All that works into it. And Peter had a great understanding of how all those things work.
Pete Douglas was a tough guy. He stuck up for the coast. He stuck to his guns. He got in a lot of trouble for it. A lot of people didn't like him. He and I got along with each other and I've found over the years that I always think that people I agree with are really smart. And I agreed with Pete most of the time.
I mean, he was a young staff person in Sacramento was frustrated by the fact that they were unable to pass the legislation to protect the coast because of the pressure and power of vested interests that were at the time utilities and oil companies. And so he crafted the language of the initiative to take the issue to the people, to the public, at a time where grassroots activism and environmental awareness were exploding across the planet, but especially in California.
And it was going very slow. And I remember calling the attorney for the Coastal Alliance saying, Ray, what's going on here? I haven't seen any drafts of the Coastal Initiative. And he said, well, we're not really doing much. I said, how about getting together this Saturday? And so we did. We met in his law firm in San Francisco and wrote the initiative in one morning.
The experience of working that bill and working with the proponents for that bill is what set him up to be such a key force in the Prop 20 campaign itself, because he had been in the trenches in the legislature trying to get the bill passed. And by the time the initiative came around, he was all in.
Janet Adams took on the responsibility of the campaign, and she did a terrific job.
Janet Adams was singularly effective in helping us to do the campaign, to gather the signatures, to put it on the ballot.
And then around that time, I guess I met the great Janet Adams, who was a real force of nature, a real dynamo, all right? Out of her house in Woodside, I mean, Janet just ran the state. I mean, Janet did not know how to take no for an answer, right? And she was determined she would do this, and she just organized this army of volunteers statewide.
And Janet was a San Mateo woman. She had been involved in Pete McCloskey's first campaign for Congress. But she took on the whole state. I mean, everybody was against her. All the bigwigs, all the important people in California were against her. The real estate developers and the unions were against. Everybody was against her. And she pulled off this amazing campaign.
She was a super savvy professional political consultant who ran campaigns at a time when that was very much still a man's world. And I just think it's worth taking a moment here to acknowledge that the person who was tasked with getting Prop 20 across the line in 1972 was a woman. And that was an unusual thing. And it was also just an illustration of how talented she was.
And then dealing with Janet, I mean, Janet was just, as I say, again, a real force of nature. I mean, she was the commander in charge. She was the General Patton of the Prop 20 campaign.
She was the person responsible for its success or failure. Basically, the buck stopped with Janet.
Prop 20, of course, it was a total grassroots campaign to get it on the ballot. It was still kind of a door-to-door advertising, people wearing buttons and the billboards and things. It was really grassrootsy that you don't see today in most campaigns. It's just all big money and lobbyists and mailers.
You know, that particular petition drive was notable because it was a true citizen's petition. It was not paid signature gatherers getting all these signatures. It was, do we care about the California coast? We need to protect it. Let's sign these petitions.
Well, I moved here in 1964, and so I remember signing Proposition 20 down at the pier. It was local. Every city took on the responsibility of getting those petitions signed. So you were signing because a neighbor wanted you to. You know, even as someone who didn't much care one way or the other, they would sign it because they knew someone that was carrying one of those petitions.
Well, when Prop 20 was first being considered, I was not really political, and yet the Sierra Club was certainly supportive of that proposition. And so one of the first kinds of things that I involved myself in was going around the neighborhood collecting signatures to try to qualify that Prop 20 initiative for the ballot.
So I went door to door and would sit at grocery stores and things like that to try to get people to sign.
Basically, I drove my VW van up to Janet Adams' house and interviewed with her, and she had received some money from the widow of the Folgers coffee fortune, and hired me to jump in my VW van and drive the coast of California and offer like $5,000 checks to grassroots environmental leaders up and down the coast to, one, create storefront ecology centers, and secondly, to try to encourage them to, within their city or county, to launch efforts to gather the signatures necessary to put the coastal initiative on the ballot.
So it was really through citizens who, I say, bless them, because they were doing it during a very difficult time along the coast of California when development was pretty well accepted, to go out onto the streets and convince the residents of the city of Huntington Beach and then all of the people in California that this was a good idea, that the coast must be saved.
So the decision to run an initiative and qualify it for the ballot in 1972, incredibly short timeline. It was all in that year. And so the first hurdle was just getting the number of signatures on the ballot. They didn't have any money. They couldn't hire paid signature gatherers. And so somebody had the brilliant idea, I suspect it was probably Janet Adams, that they would go to the annual convention of the League of Women Voters, and they would make the pitch to the League to support the initiative. And in the back, in the trunks of their cars, they had boxes and boxes of unsigned petitions. And so they drove to the annual League of Women Voters meeting. They made their pitch for the initiative. The League of Women Voters was on board, and all of those members of the League of Women Voters went home to their communities all over the state with boxes of petitions to sign for the signature gathering campaign. And they had to gather over 400,000 signatures in record time, and they did it. That was just like the first indicator of the amazing feats to come in that campaign. So the primary group behind Prop 20 was a group called the Coastal Alliance that was formed specifically for that purpose. Janet Adams was the head of it, and it was a bipartisan group. There were Democrats and Republicans. They very specifically did not want it to look like, a crunchy granola birdwatching group. They wanted it to have some gravitas, essentially. So there was like a Rand Corporation researcher on there. There were some community leaders on there. It was truly an alliance of a diverse group of organizations.
Well, the ones that I remember who were really involved, so the Planning and Conservation League was fairly new at the time. And the people who were key in that were a lot of Republicans, actually. A guy named Rich Wilson from Mendocino County, Bill Evers, who was a very successful San Francisco attorney, Dwight Steele, who was also involved in Save Lake Tahoe, lived in the East Bay, Republican. In Southern California, Dorothy Green was what Sylvia McLaughlin was to San Francisco Bay. Dorothy Green was to Santa Monica Bay. In San Diego, Roger Hedgecock, who later became mayor, sort of led the San Diego environmental activist. Even in Orange County, right in the shadow of Irvine, there was some PCL board members who were involved.
Oh, the Republicans used to have a lot of environmental thinking. I mean, environmental Republicans go back to Teddy Roosevelt. So there were good Democrats like Gaylord Nelson and good Republicans like Pete McCloskey. They were the guys that started Earth Day.
This was the opportunity for people, Republicans, Democrats, just to say, hey, look, let's set aside that and try to understand this is something that belongs to everybody. I mean, everybody has an interest in keeping our coast beautiful and accessible and not overdeveloped. And we want the community, our collective, our societal values to govern in this coastal zone.
And I'll tell you, what really was the kind of maybe the spark plug of the whole campaign. Well, first of all, Janet Adams, I mean, was incredible. But Mel Lane, who was he and his brother, Bill, were the head of Sunset Magazine, which at the time was the most popular magazine, one of, nationwide and certainly in California. It was sort of the motto of California living, Sunset Magazine. And Mel had a plane. And Mel was a great environmentalist and a big supporter of Prop 20. And he basically gave us his plane. And we used his plane several times a week to fly to all over California and hold news conferences with Republican and Democratic legislators. So Alan Srodi would go along, John Dunlap would go along, Paul Priolo, Republican assemblyman from LA, Pete Wilson, Republican assemblyman from San Diego, who later became mayor and then United States Senator.
Have the right to use the ocean area up to the mean high tide line for fishing, for swimming, for boating, and so forth. But if you can't get to it because your access is cut off, then what good is that right? This initiative will, as one of the things that the initiative will do, is to assure that there is adequate access to the public to the use of the beaches.
Yeah, we went up and down the coast and tried to get as much press as we could to let people know that there was an initiative on the ballot and how important it was and this and that, you know.
But I want to mention Bert Muley, because Bert Muley in '72 was campaigning for the Coastal Act. He had been the county planning director of Santa Cruz and resigned, not fired, resigned because in protest over the development that the Board of Supervisors was allowing along the Santa Cruz coastline. And he became a professor and lecturer at Santa Cruz and San Jose State. And Bert that year had a slideshow, and he went up and down the coast saying, these are the warts. These are the things that you should be mad about, and I know you are mad about, and we need to prevent it from happening anymore and, you know, get good planning on the coast. He was a planner, you know, master's in city planning from UC Berkeley, and he just thought, this is what we need, good planning. But he knew the politics of it. And so he worked tirelessly and had that slideshow that he carried up and down the coast to show people this is what will happen if we don't pass Proposition 20. It will continue to happen. So he was a main mover and shaker that year.
So in every region of California, there was some version of coastal atrocities being committed. And when the campaign for Prop 20 came along and kind of knitted all of those stories together and knitted all of those activists together, there was not just a profound story to be told, there was a really tenacious army of public sentiment that was harnessed, which was necessary to go up against the opposition to Prop 20. Even though this was just a scrappy grassroots campaign without any money, the opposition took Prop 20 very, very seriously. They were going up against a formidable opposition of the who's who of California industry, the oil companies, the railroad companies, the real estate and agriculture and power companies, all of whom were donating in the tens of thousands of dollars apiece.
Well, you have opposition came from the industries. I mean, you had all the industrial lobbyists and their money involved in this kind of campaign against it.
Well, I know the oil companies fought it because they thought this could put a crimp in their style to drill more offshore. I know the realtors were opposed against it, the building industry.
They hired a very savvy advertising firm to run the No on Prop 20 campaign, Whitaker and Baxter. And Whitaker and Baxter were sort of the grandfathers of sort of dirty tricks and disinformation, which we still see today in political campaigns. But they came up with a very deceitful campaign slogan that said, "Don't lock up the beaches, vote no on Prop 20," which of course is exactly the opposite.
If you are a student of politics, Whitaker and Baxter is sort of like the Darth Vader Death Star of political campaign firms. They were hired by large corporations that wanted to win, and they had a very simple sledgehammer approach, kind of a Neanderthal approach to defeating initiatives, in which they would simply steal the slogan, maybe twist it a little bit, and then spend 10 times as much money to tell people to vote the opposite way with the slogan.
What's wrong with 20? Plenty. Proposition 20, the Coastal Initiative, doesn't provide one dime for new access roads to California's beaches or expansion of camping and other facilities. Proposition 20 could tie up for years all recreation and other projects, public or private, along the shore. The beach already belongs to the public. The problem is to get to it. Don't lock up the beach. Vote no on 20. The proceeding sponsored by Citizens Against the Coastal Initiative.
They raised a ton of money so that they could flood the airways with television ads. And again, so much has changed. But back then, people were watching television and they weren't distracted by cable and network and streaming. And it was like there were only a couple of TV stations and you couldn't turn the ads off. You couldn't even do that. And so, flooding the airwaves with opposition commercials had an impact on people. It was seen by a lot of eyeballs.
They're making up stuff. So I think it invoked anger and frustration in the people who really saw what was happening with it. And it pissed people off. And sometimes that's good.
Proposition 20, to fair play and facts, not falsity, in advertising. We invite Whitaker and Baxter to meet with us and Secretary of State Edmund G. Brown, Jr. to agree to the following basic principles of fair play. 1, a complete public disclosure of each week's campaign receipts and expenditures. 2, that a $250,000 ceiling on the amount of money to be spent by either side be established on Prop 20. 3, creation of an impartial group of 3 persons to review all campaign materials and advertising before publication for accuracy.
Thought as to whether Whitaker and Baxter may respond to your challenge here?
Well, we hope they will.
In view of
we hope that making this public will cause them to respond.
In view of what you term their past image, is that an optimistic hope or is that a practical hope?
Yes, it's optimistic.
Why?
Why is it optimistic? I personally do not think they will respond. I think that they will continue to do the kinds of campaigns which they have in the past, which are basically based upon fear.
I don't think I ever met those people. I mean, I just knew they were there. I knew we were outgunned. And sometimes it was really frustrating, no matter, how much, all the good vibes we had and all the good feelings we had and all the fun we were having, to see all these billboards and to see all these spots and to hear all these lies. and realize who was behind them, right? And the tragedy of what would happen if they won. So their presence, you know, I remember I never dealt with them like, could you tone it down a little bit, or could we make a deal? No, it was too late to make a deal. We were on the ballot, baby. We were going all the way.
The media plays an incredibly important role in coastal protection, and they played an outsized role in the passage of Prop 20.
By that time, I was chief of staff to Peter Baer, Senator Peter Baer in Sacramento. I knew of the initiative process. I knew they did it all with volunteers. And Peter and I talked a lot about how they were doing and how many numbers. Once they qualified, then I asked Peter to take a leave of absence from his Senate staff to become the press secretary. That was the job I undertook. Whether I ever had the title or not, I don't know, for the campaign.
The number of positive editorials, the number of really deeply reported articles, and the brilliance of the political cartoons really helped move the needle, really helped support the efforts of the campaign.
The Dennis the Menace cartoon, the guy who wrote Dennis the Menace, who lived in Carmel, drew a cartoon for the campaign that was the little kid going to the beach, and there's a factory there, and the caption is something like, "I went to the beach and it was all gone." And, you know, a picture being worth 1,000 words sort of made the issue something everybody could understand.
And so there were some just fantastic political cartoons. Dennis the Menace became one of the spokespeople for the campaign through, which is a weekly cartoon that used to show up in the newspaper when you got it on Sunday on the Funnies page. It was on color. I don't know if people even read newspapers anymore, but back then, like when the newspaper showed up at your house, most people turned straight to the Funnies page. That was the first page where people went. And Dennis the Menace, the iconic character, had a series of vignettes where, I went to the beach and the beach was gone, or, going to the beach and seeing just a line of houses and saying, "Where's the beach?" So the media loved Prop 20. Journalists, political cartoonists, editorial writers. I mean, who doesn't love an underdog, right?
They had the money. And like almost every initiative campaign I've ever been involved with, the people that have the money tell the biggest lies. And so we had to be very creative to combat their lies because we didn't have any money, right? And there was something called the fairness doctrine at the time, which really said that stations, radio and TV stations, had to give kind of equal time to all sides of an argument. So we had this theory that the stations that were just running all these paid ads from the developers and the PG&E and Southern California Edison and all those companies against Prop 20, the stations were just running those ads were violating the fairness doctrine. So we had a theory that we thought we could make a case that we deserved free time to match their paid time.
Yeah, that was an interesting, since then been changed. But at the time, whenever somebody said something criticizing you negative, then you got equal and opposite response time, and that actually had to be absorbed by the media.
A friend of Peter Baer's, a San Francisco attorney by the name of Lou Reed. So Lou Reed had worked for the Federal Communications Commission as an attorney in Washington, the FCC. And Lou Reed thought, there was not another meeting of the commission, but Lou felt that if he wrote a letter to the person that he worked with, don't know the name anymore, if I ever did, at the commission, that he might be able to get him, which he did, to write a letter saying, in my judgment, if the FCC, this case came before the FCC, they would rule in favor of Prop 20, of the pro-Prop 20 people. So with that letter, I and I forget who else, we started visiting television stations all over the state and saying, look at this, you're going to be in trouble, you could lose your license unless you give us some free time. And they did.
So once again, the opposition was a victim of its own success, because for all the time that they were able to purchase for no on Prop 20 campaign ads, they were inadvertently opening the door for the yes on Prop 20 people to have equal access.
Well, then we had to produce an ad. We didn't have anything to put on the air. And as a friend of Janet's in San Francisco, I wish I could remember his name, God bless him, who suggested that we call a guy in LA. He had a PR firm. I knew a guy in LA who made TV spots and was a good environmentalist. His name was Sidney Galanti. And Sid Galanti, I called him cold, said, whoever suggested I call you, we've got this free time. What really prompted the call was that Channel 2 in Oakland said, we're not going to give you any spots, but we'll give you an hour. Prime time, we'll give you 1 hour. Well, shit. What did we put on the air, right? So Sid flew up, volunteer, produced a whole 1 hour of television in support of Prop 20, and then he produced a lot of TV spots, which we were able to get on in every station that would give us time. We used those spots. So we got millions of dollars of free publicity just by pure chutzpah, just faking it, basically.
This is all happening before people had cell phones and social media and personal computers. This was all done, this was hand-to-hand combat in the old style. People, if you wanted to make a phone call, you had to dial the rotary phone. There weren't even voicemail messages back then. And so it was a very personal campaign. It was very person to person, and the level of trust and respect that was required to pull that off, people had to be where they said they were going to be.
Well, it was a grassroots movement, and I think people had to be educated. I think what I remember is that you had to have people out. I mean, these were ordinary people, but they had to be able to tell people very simply what this would mean to them. Signs in neighborhoods, a perfect tool, and the locals, I want to say we were a little naive. We weren't as sophisticated as we became. But I think we knew that certain things would work, and that was one human being talking to another human being at the same level and pointing out why this was important and that it could cause no harm other than the developers.
This was like grassroots versus money, grassroots versus the real estate industry, grassroots versus developers.
There was an amazing phone tree of hundreds of people that were engaged in the campaign and their phone numbers to organize events. And for every county in the state, this was a campaign to save the coast, but the campaign was statewide. It was Stanislaus County and Riverside County and San Bernardino County and Shasta County. There were people in every single county of California that were working to pull this off. And the way they would organize their events, whether it was a press event or a strategy event, is there would be a person who would call a group of people, and those people would call another group of people who would call another group of people. It was this incredible arterial system of people who were committed to show up when they were needed. And they did that over and over again through the length of the campaign.
So that coalition was grassrootsy, and it also had politicians who felt it was, I think, their responsibility. And then the academic community also was involved with Bert Muley and other people saying we have a role in this too.
Now it was a campaign that was everything from kind of young college and high school kids in T-shirts and Birkenstocks and the blue-haired little old lady conservationists. It was kind of a cool, extremes of the generation gap, that worked to make it happen.
There were many activists and Ansel Adams and other people that really cared about the coast that spoke up, and so it wasn't just the younger generation. I think it really helped that there were people in all generations who saw the iconic and important and emotional value and kind of business value of the shoreline for the state, and that there had to be a greater than local interest in looking at it.
Young people as well as old people, Republicans, Democrats, white people, brown people, black people.
Yeah, there was a lot of diverse support. I mean, the surfers, of course, are very important people in this effort.
Rob Coughlin was a surfer. He and I worked for a campaign management firm, Sanford Weiner and Company. And he was a big surfer. They called him Bird Legs because he was so good. And he organized the surfers up and down the state.
Well, surfers have never been joiners. It's not a team sport. So it's hard to get surfers involved politically. And once they are involved, it's hard for them to work in unison. I think the main thing that I did that had any kind of impact was that the Huntington Beach Surfing Championships were on, and I was in it. I was surfing in the contest, and I got the other contestants to wear Yes on 20 t-shirts when they did their TV interviews. So that was my main contribution, was letting people know that surfers were in favor of coastal protection.
There were so many people, who loved the coast and were trying to protect it. And this was an opportunity for them to get involved in something. It was a good campaign.
So we decided that let's campaign the need for a coastal act, coastal commission, by showing how the coast is locked up. And because so much of that is just in the rural areas, how do you show the rural areas and get an attention? So the idea was, how about let's do a bike ride from Land's End in San Francisco down to Balboa Park, I think it's called, in San Diego.
Well, that was an idea that I forget exactly who came up with, but we were thinking, how can you demonstrate, right? You've got this whole coastline. And somebody said, let's do a bike ride down the coastline. I was part of the planning for it. One other member of the Senate who was very supportive was the head of the Senate, Jim Mills from San Diego, who was a big biker, by the way. And then I recruited Sam Farr, whose father, Fred Farr, had been a state senator, was a big environmentalist. And so Sam basically took the leadership.
I said, I don't know anything about bike rides. And he said, well, just go. You had a station wagon. He says, you just take your station wagon and we'll get you a bullhorn. And you just drive down. You know enough about the issues. And whenever you see a sign that says the coast, barbed wire fences with signs saying no trespassing, just stop there. And so thank God at the last minute, Jim Mills, who was president pro tem of the state Senate, who actually loved riding bicycles, he joins it. And but for him, this thing would have been a total fracasso. But all of a sudden the Highway Patrol is very interested in escorting us. State Park System, where we were going to spend the night, said, yes, we'll provide campsites for you. And Sierra Clubs, because now we had a really important state senator on this trip, was going to pay attention to getting their locals to bring the food to these campsites.
I was sort of the advance man for this bike ride, and we'd, I'd drive ahead and post staple white pie plates with arrows on telephone poles to make sure that everybody kind of knew where to get to, and I'd drive ahead to some radio station and to set up an interview.
So we held these press conferences saying, look, the purpose of this is that the coast belongs to the people. We own the beaches in this state. In the East Coast, some of the beaches are private and you got to pay for them. You don't pay to go to the beaches in California. And Malibu was another visual example. Do you want this for the whole state of California? So I think a couple of photographs and a couple of statements that we were able to make with not only with a coastal ride, but to point out that, yeah, we do have a coast. And yes, it is under attack. And that we need to do something to save it.
We picked up, kind of Hollywood celebrities along the route to help us, that would ride a segment of the bike ride, that would provide visibility and help stimulate TV or radio interviews. It seemed like we did more radio interviews than anything else.
And when we were finally got to Los Angeles, and we had Charlton Heston join us. I always thought it very interesting that he ended up becoming the president of the NRA and the National Rifle Association, but he was supporting the Coastal Act, and we had people join us for the day. You could join for a short ride or for a day or whatever days. I think not everybody who started in San Francisco finished in San Diego, but just about the same number of people ended up finishing. But I think we got the message across, and at that time it was, well, what is it? Why do we need an initiative? Why do we need a coastal commission? And pointing out that, look, but for it, local land use planning has been heavily influenced by developers and by money, and that you need a really statewide perspective. You can't just have all the coastal counties doing something different from each other.
These were a bunch of people who wanted to make the world a better place, right? And that really built camaraderie for the bike trip. So they were biking together all day, they were camping together at night, they were visiting these towns and talking to like-minded people and just building more excitement, more buzz, more activity and commitment around getting this campaign passed. What they lacked in funding, they made up for in creative, spirited, public-minded events. Well, Peter Douglas was very hands-on. He was traveling all up and down the state of California, meeting with environmental groups, meeting with advocates. He told me about going up to the North Coast, where it's pretty conservative up there. But there were little groups of advocates up there who wanted to do what they could to help protect the special resources of the North Coast. But they couldn't afford to be seen with him. And so they arranged to meet him in one of the state parks, like behind a specific redwood tree at a particular time of day, so that they could appear to be like nonchalantly going out for a hike and not be spotted by some of the more conservative reactionary elements of the populace up there. Because one thing that's still true about Del Norte and Humboldt County is everybody knows everybody up there, and there are no secrets.
There was an existing community of environmentalists here. We had our local Sierra Club chapter and Audubon chapter and California Native Plant Society and others. But they were a distinct minority in the community, and lumber was king, economically, politically. There was a pretty powerful coalition between the labor unions and the timber industry, and anyone who challenged the industry was challenging what were essentially the best paid jobs in the county. We had 2 pulp mills, which created quite the smell. One of the quotes that was a kind of a common trope back then, was that's the smell of money. And so there was just really a very powerful backlash to any kind of regulatory invention in Sacramento.
I would say that tension between local control and state control was at the heart of the Coastal Act. And it made a lot of people angry who didn't like it, especially you get into rural areas of the North Coast and Humboldt and Del Norte. When you get up to the North counties, it's a lot of leave me alone, libertarians, I have my property, stay off my property. So the politics of the North Coast were different than the politics of Monterey Bay.
Those groups got together and organized an Earth Fair on Earth Day at the fairgrounds in Eureka. And that coalesced into the formation of a group called the North Coast Environmental Council, who then decided to establish a center called the North Coast Environmental Center. The Prop 20 campaign reached out to us and asked for our help. And it was a nonprofit organization, so we kept the Prop 20 campaign outside the front door, but really the Environmental Center was the initial connection with Peter Douglas and the other folks who were putting the campaign together. Most of us newcomers came from parts of California where the coast was much more threatened. And so we were, I think, more aware of what could happen. I think there was an extreme mistrust of outside authority, and a kind of a we can take care of ourselves, local control attitude. Things were so polarized, and it was also cultural because the environmental community was viewed as the long-haired hippies from the campus, and so there was a real us and them divide. Senator Jim Mills was going to do a bike ride from San Francisco to San Diego, and we decided to hatch our own bike ride from the Oregon border to San Francisco Bay. And so a group of the photographs I've looked back at, I think there were 15 or 20 of us who went up and started on the Oregon border and rode down to the San Francisco Bay. We didn't get anywhere near the statewide publicity that, because we didn't have the kind of celebrity like a senator, but we did get lots of localized attention. Riding bikes on little narrow 2-lane roads with logging trucks roaring by, in the first place is a little bit of an iffy proposition, but if you're doing it and they've heard what you're doing, or they see the signs on your bikes, it can be really, have a truck bear down on you and be a foot away with a blare in their horns. Can be a little bit of a heart-stopping experience, and I have some pretty powerful memories of that. We rode through Fort Bragg, which today, of course, would be celebrating our arrival, and there was some serious harassment, people honking and screaming at us, but the Mendocino coast was a really, really conservative place back then. So really the impact, other than it being really an interesting experience, really the impact was when we would roll into a more urban community. We had a really positive experience in Eureka where we had a rally at the courthouse, and when we came riding across the Samoa Bridge and then into Eureka, there was a big welcoming crowd. So that was probably the high points. And then getting to the Golden Gate Bridge, of course, and riding into San Francisco.
Almost in the last month of the campaign, 500 billboards went up overnight in Los Angeles, not that said, the beach belongs to you, don't lock it up. Vote no, not vote yes, vote no on Proposition 20.
The billboards were essentially trying to say that if you care about the coast, you need to vote against this because you're going to lose they were very, very misleading.
I became sort of one of the campaign volunteer coordinators for the city and county of Los Angeles. And we would go out and gather volunteers by me going out and talking to high schools and college students and saying, they've got $1 million or $1 billion, we have you, so I need more of you. So we had all these volunteers, and they were saying, well, we need to go tear those billboards down or set them on fire or do all these things. So we, no, don't do that, don't do that. But what do kids do in Los Angeles? They cruise. So we quickly, just one time, took all the volunteers and we did a grid map of the county of Los Angeles and assigned one person to each grid to say, locate the billboards and figure out where they are. And the billboards were navy blue background, white lettering, but the no was about this big in day-glow orange red lettering. We went down to Huntington Beach to some hippie silk screener, and we, I think for a 6-pack of beer and something, he silk screened about 500 yeses at the same day-glow orange with navy blue background to fit over the nose. And one night we met in a parking lot with a large number of volunteers. We passed out the yeses and sent them out, and we said, tonight only. You can only do this one night, because tomorrow night they're going to have guards out, and if you get caught doing it and altering it, it'll be bad, but we can do this one night only. So, but the kids had come up with ingenious methods, like a lot of them had borrowed their mom's station wagon, and remember, this is Los Angeles, so there's a lot of swimming pools, and you clean the bottom of the swimming pool with these telescoping aluminum poles that have a wide brush. So one kid would hold the tee, the other kid get out with the pool brush and slap the yes on top of the no. And in 5 seconds, they could pull up in front of a billboard, get out, change it from no to yes, get back in the car and drive to the next one.
So the innovative way that the activists got panels to put over the top of them and did it was phenomenal. And it made a difference, because mostly in the LA market, but that's a huge part of the voting population of the state.
So the next day in the Los Angeles Times, the front page of the B section is a photograph of the altered billboard with the story. So not only had these volunteers gone out, with a total maybe $50 investment and stolen back 300 of the 500 billboards, we get a front page picture in the LA Times showing the altered billboard. So that was $1 million worth of free publicity there. And at the time, there was a lot of campaigns going on, and the billboard companies were frankly backlogged, and it would take them weeks to go back out and alter the billboards. So we got the front page story, and the billboard stayed up for several weeks for much of the campaign. So it was just a classic example of just ingenious grassroots activism going out doing the right thing. They stole our slogan, we borrowed their billboards, and kind of the rest is history.
Prop 20 was the ultimate victory of the underdogs.
They had the money and we had the energy, They had the corporations and we had the people. And we really felt we were doing God's work. I mean, we were out there saving the California coast.
The Yes on Prop 20 campaign was outspent by more than 10-1, and yet they were able to pull off a miraculous success. Prop 20, when it passed by 55%, which was more than the president won in the election that year.
There was a diverse array of issues on that ballot. One was to legalize marijuana. It did come close to passing. One was to make abortion illegal, I believe, and that failed. There was the Coastal Act, and nationally it was Richard Nixon versus George McGovern. And so that's the kind of election it was, that Californians could turn down legalizing marijuana but pass a Coastal Act and support abortion, but vote for Richard Nixon.
Proposition 20 passed. What made me sit up and take notice, it passed in every coastal county up to Sonoma. And anything up there would fail if it looked like some outside group having any influence on anything. So I thought, San Diego is incredibly conservative. Orange County is incredibly conservative. San Luis is not wildly radical except for Cal Poly. I mean, where'd all these yes votes come from? And it was really, to me, a reaction against what people regarded as poorly planned or unplanned growth.
I was head of the Economic Development Committee in the State Assembly when I got elected in 1980. And do you know what the #1 attraction in the entire state of California is? It's not Disneyland. It's the Los Angeles County beaches. More people visit those beaches than all of the other private entertainment parks, Hollywoods, everything. So it's the coast that defines California.
I think the inland people is the one who carried that, when you think about it, that they're the ones who are being shut off from the coast. They're the ones seeing new development that shocked them. They're the ones that worried about, is there enough parking for me to take my family if I lived in Santa Ana? So I would be willing to bet, if you could look at the demographics and the polling from the actual results of Prop 20 in each county, you'd see probably a pretty good number of people who were 2, 3, 5 miles from the coast, not right on the coast, voting for it. And people from the Central Valley, which is known still as being pretty conservative, there was an outcry there too of, we want to go to the coast. And so there was probably a reasonable yes vote in the Central Valley for the people that understood that they were connected to the coast in some way.
I just recall going, OMG, it worked. And it was kind of like, it was jubilation, celebration that the public could make a difference. So I think the main reason it passed is love for the coast. I mean, it's sort of that simple to me.
When you ask what would California look like without Prop 20, just some of the examples come to mind. Well, first of all, you wouldn't have the California Coastal Trail. That wouldn't exist. Bolsa Chica would be a yacht marina. The Bayona wetlands would now be underneath a state-of-the-art movie studio. The Fiscalini Ranch Preserve in Cambria would be a private gated development with its own desal plant.
What do I think you would see? I think you wouldn't see the coast. That would be the first thing you would see, is you wouldn't see the coast, because that would be a steady blockade of development along the coast. That's the first thing that would happen. You'd probably see an overabundance of coastal golf courses. That was a big thing. People still love to throw infrastructure on the coast, polluting infrastructure. They try. I think you'd see even more of that.
There'd be a series of nuclear power plants on the coast of California. We wouldn't just be talking about how to decommission Diablo Canyon. There'd be several more.
I think you'd see a lot more no trespassing signs. What people, I think, don't realize is that every time they see a sign that says public access way here, that's the Coastal Commission.
I think you could go up and down the coast and go look at it now and see vacant areas, and imagine that if the San Mateo County Board of Supervisors had their way, if Half Moon Bay had their way, if the LA County Board of Supervisors, San Luis Obispo, things would have exploded from just the pressure. The ground is so precious, the views are so good, it's so spectacular, and I'm sure you could say that about many parts of the state, from San Diego all the way up.
I think it's a remarkable achievement to be able to take a big industrial state like California and have statewide governance along its entire coast. I think the act is probably the strongest land use planning act maybe in the world.
Peter Douglas used to always say that the greatest accomplishments along the coast are the things that you don't see. The wetlands that weren't filled, the freeways that weren't expanded. It's really the natural features of the coast that are the greatest accomplishments of Prop 20 and the Coastal Act.
Peter Douglas's slogan was that, the coast is never saved, coast is always in the process of being saved. And I think you can expand that to almost any environmental issue. You never win an environmental issue. You're constant, you have to stay at it.
Activism, public involvement is key. That's what made the Coastal Act happen. That's why I call it the people's law. And it's what sustained it. Every time there's been a challenge or an attack on it, it's the public that's stepped forward.
It's not like the Coastal Act alone protects the coast. I wish that were the case, but the Coastal Act is the floor. The Coastal Act is the foundation. Nothing happens to protect the coast unless people stay engaged. I mean, the Coastal Act is simply a tool for people to use to protect the coast, but it is still an active requirement because without public engagement, we're always one bad decision away from, losing what we've fought so hard to keep.
Politics is the art of compromise. So what happens is you got enough money, you just beat the thing down until you compromise on something. We weren't going to do it as big or as many units, but you're going to end up getting something, and maybe you shouldn't have gotten anything. So politics is going to where it's going to play out the future of this coast. And politics are voters, and elections have consequences. And so the best thing you can do is to educate people what the value is of participating.
I think this is a moment where we have kind of a new generation of different voices coming into the conversation around the coast, and agencies like the Coastal Commission are now developing environmental justice policies, hiring environmental justice liaisons, starting to think about how EJ kind of integrates into all of these different aspects of their work. Bringing voices, bringing neighborhoods, that weren't part of the conversation in before, kind of adding on to that legacy.
I think that it is a bedrock that provides a very important starting point in this conversation. For us, we see everything on coast and ocean through the lens of environmental justice, and that is our unique view. And I think that without the Coastal Act, without Prop 20, we really wouldn't even have this conversation. And
it's really the public who has to protect it, because without the public standing up for it and speaking on its behalf, I fear it won't continue to exist.
Yeah, this harkens back to Peter Douglas saying the coast isn't saved, it's always being saved. That spirit of, wow, look at what we've got. Look at Big Sur if you can never get a chance to drive down it. It's awe-inspiring for anybody. I don't care where you came from or how long you've lived in California. If you stand on Point Lobos and watch a sunset, or the beaches of LA, and or setting over the islands and from Santa Barbara or whatever, it's incredible. And it's still worth saving, but it still has to be saved in an active way at times.
Your eyes looked from your mother's face. Wildflower
a seed in the sand and stone. May the four winds blow you safely home. Roll away the dew. Roll away the dew. Roll away the dew. Roll away the dew. Tell you where the four winds trail. In Franklin's tower there hangs a bell. It can ring, turn the night to day. It can ring like fire when you lose your way. Roll away the dew. Roll away the dew. Roll away the dew. Roll away the dew. God save the child who rings that bell. May have one good ring, baby, that you can't tell. One watch by night, one watch by day. If you get confused, listen to the music play. Passed away. Some come to make it just one more day. Whichever way your pleasure takes.